You want the absolute minimum amount of fuel left in your tank to do this job. I'd suggest that your distance to empty should be 10 kilometres or 6 miles or less than that. Otherwise you're going to spill fuel everywhere when you take the pump out. Start by disconnecting the negative terminal of the battery in the trunk or boot of the car. Remove the large belly pan cover underneath the engine, and it's optional to remove the transmission belly pan cover underneath the transmission. At the back of the car, I'm going to remove this heat shield here, the brace, larger brace here, and the triangular support brace. One arm running down there and one arm running down that side. Now you can remove those three pieces individually or remove them all together. It is a bit easier to remove them in three parts to save damage to bending this flimsy aluminium plate. So remove that first, the 8mm screws holding that onto this piece and that piece. Then you can remove this front brace. That's a bunch of 16mm bolts and some 13mm nuts. 4 16mm bolts I think and 4 13mm nuts. And then you can remove this brace. It does come off in parts, but easiest just to take it off as one piece. So 16mm bolt there, 2 16mm bolts here, and another 16mm bolt at that end, and then a 13mm nut there and a 13mm nut on here that are hidden up inside underneath the car. The exhaust is next to come off. Started at the front. I had aftermarket downpipes here, so I had bolts through there. If you've got the standard downpipes, they'll be studs with nuts. Little trick, if you're trying to get the one up inside there, pass your 13mm socket through, turn it back, and there you go. That's why there's a bit of a cutout in the pipe there, but you won't get it out that way or get it in that way. Pass it up through and swing it back. So remove those. I've got a support here to support the pipes. Then moving back, this bracket here, which is a couple of E10 bolts in it, that comes off. Moving back, and the next two parts of these exhaust hangers. So there's one here, E10 bolt that holds that one on there, and another one on this side. You'll notice I've got cable ties here. These are ready to support the weight of the exhaust as I let it down in a minute. So they're not holding it up. There's still a couple of bolts up here at the back. So I remove this little line here on the little exhaust flapper valve on the right side of the car, and then up in there that where I'm pointing, there's a 13mm nut that's got to come off. I've already loosened it 90% of the way. Now I've got cable ties there. I'll take that nut out and slowly lower the exhaust down, and it's the same on this side. There's a 13mm nut up in there where my finger is pointing, and just use a spanner or ratchet spanner to get to that and remove that nut, or get it most of the way off, and then you can lower the exhaust down onto those cable ties. You see now the front of the exhaust is lowered down and the rear is supported by the cable ties. So the exhaust is here hanging about 20 to 30 centimetres below the car. Next to come out is this heat shield, which is held on by a series of 10mm bolts and a whole heap of 8mm nuts all around the edges and sides. And from memory, there is a couple up here where they overlap with another metal cover. You need to remove, I believe, a few of these to be able to get this heat shield out. That's the cover removed. Now I'd had mine off a month or so ago, so it came off easily. If yours doesn't, you may need to get like a trim tool and carefully pry it in where some of the screws and attachment points are. Just it might have sort of stuck to the chassis a little bit, and just gently pry it off. You want to be very careful not to deform it though, otherwise you might end up with rattles and other issues when you go to put it back in. There is one of these 8mm screws here, this one here from the underside, that points actually up towards the fuel tank. Is not actually holding it on, just holding a little spacer on there which backs up against the fuel tank. Still got the exhaust hanging down here, it's out of the way. This gives us access to the fuel tank here, and the cap holding the fuel pump on. There's a couple of cable ties to cut there and one there that hold that loom on. And then this plug here removes by sliding this cover, which I've slid it already up a bit. So let's put it back to where it was. So it starts off there, slide it up and pull on the cable as you slide it up. I'll need to put the camera down to do it. That's the underside of the connector. It's now removed. And then I've taken the fuel line out. So the fuel line need two hands, so I can't film it while I do it, but there's a little ring here. So push this in towards the car, this connector here, push in towards the car, then push the ring in towards the car, hold the ring there in towards the car, and pull on this while holding the ring in towards the car, and the connector will come off. Now I've used a special tool like this. This is an adjustable one using a ratchet to undo the locking ring. I've got a bucket underneath ready to catch any extra fuel, so I did run the car out of fuel, but this ring comes off anti-clockwise, and I've loosened it off, and now I'll remove it, and I expect there will be a little bit of fuel to come out. This is the in-tank filter assembly that comes out first. So we've got that lock ring off, and then just pull on that, and it'll be a bit of a contortionist, twist and turn it to get it out. As it's coming out, you need to remove the electrical connector from it to make sure you don't damage the wires by pulling on it too tight. And there's also another connector onto this part here that's gone back up inside the tank there. Pull it out, that bit there, which has just got a couple of push tabs on the side there, and that pops off, and now it comes out. Now I'll undo this connector here, this one here, and then the filter assembly is out and loose. Then I've got to dig in there and get the bucket assembly with the pump out. And this is what the pump assembly looks like inside the tank. This is the next bit to be removed. There is a float there on the back side of it. It's a bit hard to see there. You can just sort of see a little black bit up in the top right corner, that creamy pinky coloured bucket assembly, and that is the pivot end of the float sensor. This plug will come into two parts, so pull it apart like that. This bit here is the wires that go over the top to the fuel gauge, I think on this side of the tank. So we need to disconnect it from the blue plug there just by pulling it out. This is the fuel line we took off the filter assembly. Now we need to split it and the lead, this line here in my left hand, push the clips in and pull these apart. This line here goes over the top of the tank, once again onto the other side. Once you've pulled the bucket assembly up and off of its locating bracket, then reach in and find this thick black line, and which goes all the way over to the other side of the tank, and carefully remove it from the bucket assembly just by wiggling and pulling on it. Here's an old partly dismantled bucket assembly, and just to show you, this has been chopped off here, but this is the black line that goes from the bucket assembly to the hump on the other side, the fuel tank on the other side, and it's just an interference fit in there effectively. So when you are trying to remove that, just give it a sharp tug and it will come out. Then you can carefully pull the bucket assembly out through the hole, including its float assembly. That's the bucket assembly removed. I just want to show you the float assembly. So here it is here. See, it's sort of tucked in underneath. That's how you need it to sort of come out. Its natural position is floating around like that, but you don't want to bend this. My left thumb is pushing on this metal rod, or you're going to get incorrect fuel readings later on when you put it back in. So there's a slot in the back of the bucket assembly there, and a clip on the front. You need to push the clip on the front in to remove it from this stand that's inside of the tank. So that clip on the front goes to the left side of that stand, and the taller part on the right of that stand is what slides up into the back of the bucket assembly. You can check the description below for a link on how to rebuild your pump, or continue watching now for the reassembly process. Tuck the float assembly in just underneath, just before you then put it all back in through the hole this way. Now, with the pump just sort of lying on its side just inside the hole, I'm going to get that smooth black line there I'm pointing at, and poke it down inside of that hole in the top of the bucket assembly where it came out from, that hole. And join your yellow and blue plug back together, and join these two connectors back together. That's the line from the other side of the tank. Now guide your bucket assembly back onto its mounting bracket, making sure that your float assembly was free again out the side of the bucket assembly. I found it easiest to reach with my left hand. You're guiding the back of it down over the taller part sticking up, and once you guide that down, it automatically clips in on the front side of the bucket assembly. Then get all your three connectors out, make sure they're not tangled up too much with each other, and we're going to put the filter in next. And put the double connector onto the 5/16 top piece, top EFI connection. They only go one way, one's 5/16, one's 3/8, so put that one on first, and then we're going to try and get this back inside the tank. So there's the double connector, the 5/16 connector onto the male EFI outlet there, or connector. The bottom one here is a 3/8, which goes onto the other hose. That'll go on next, and then I will twist and turn and get this back inside the tank, putting on the electrical connector last as it goes into this port here. And push the filter assembly in the rest of the way. There's a little locating tab here which goes into a slot at the top. My seal started falling out, so I put the camera down as I push that in the last little bit. Screw the locking ring on, and then we'll tighten that up the rest of the way with the special tool. Okay, I've used the special tool to tighten up the lock ring here. I looked back in my earlier video to see the alignment of the words and notches and stuff in this, and it's not quite back to where it was, but it's as tight as I'm going to do it. I have done it up very firm. Some new cable ties here, locking that on, one on each side. This lead here back up inside the clamp, or the clip. The plug is back on and slid down, locked in. Last step is to plug in the fuel line there. The heat shield beneath the tail shaft and above the exhaust goes back in. The exhaust system now is back up in place and all tightened up. The rear cross brace and front brace, that one there, and that aluminium plate are all back in. These 16mm bolt heads here, these ones here, the ones on the other ends of these braces, and the 16mm head bolts here on this central brace are all done up to 50 foot-pounds or 67 Newton meters. The rest of all the nuts and bolts are done by feel. Don't forget the hidden ones. One 13mm up in there, it's on the end of that brace there, and another one hidden up in there, just done up to feel. Put the plastic belly pans back on and reconnect the negative terminal to the battery to complete the work on the car. Now, it's advisable not to cycle the ignition or turn the ignition on without running the engine, because this may cause the high pressure fuel pump solenoid to oscillate madly and damage it if there's air in the line. So the first time you turn the ignition on should be in an attempt to start the car. It will have a long crank, but it won't risk damaging the high pressure fuel pump.